Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiegue, live today on May the 20th. I have another round of stories to get to on today's episode to start off the week. We'll continue our weekly series, or our daily series, I should say, on the quarterback rankings going division by division. This time we'll focus in on the NFC South. Then we're going to talk about the Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence reportedly being close to agreeing on a contract extension around the $50 million mark. I'll get into more of the details on that. Plus, this year on the primetime schedule, there will be no Eagles versus Dallas Cowboys matchup, the first time in over a decade that happens. So I'll give you the reasons why that is and whether or not I agree with it or if I find it a little bit ridiculous. So stay tuned for that. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And also, before I start on the rankings, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or you want to make any comments on today's episode, use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net, that you see on your screen. By using this link, your question or comment will pop up in my chat box. I'll read it on air, and that way I'll get your guys' perspective on anything I say or anything we're going over with any of the topics. It's a massive help for the show, and also we greatly appreciate it anytime you guys are able to do that. So again, the tip and donations link is GSMCPodcast.net. And without further ado, I will move on to the rankings. Like I mentioned, we're going to continue on with the daily rankings of these quarterbacks per division. And we're going to stick into the NFC South. Pretty difficult one. I won't lie with how I ranked them, going from 4 all the way to 1. The 4 through 3 were pretty easy, but then the top 2 were a bit of a toss-up. But I will get into it and start off with the number 4 overall spot. Bryce Young, really no surprise here. Coming off of his first year, 2-15 record, so a pretty poor start to his career. But the biggest point I wanted to make with Bryce Young is that this is the perfect situation that I mentioned, the epitome of drafting a quarterback just because teams feel the need to draft one. I know you get the first overall pick a few years back or 2 years back now, and you know the pressure on you to draft a quarterback to try and flip this whole organization around is a lot. I do know that and acknowledge that, but again, drafting him, only really having Adam Thielen there as an option to throw to, you have Miles Sanders in the backfield as well as Chuba Hubbard, new offensive or new head coach I should say, and then you throw him in behind a line that isn't the greatest. On top of that, it was never going to be a great situation, and you compare it now to what Caleb Williams is stepping into, it's night and day. There's really no comparison, and on top of that, I won't bash Bryce Young. That's more on the Carolina Panthers for not being ready to draft him in his rookie season. But regardless of that, he threw for nearly 3,000 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions, again with a lack of skill set players on the outside. And they were all right, but then again, it's nothing compared to, you hate to compare him to CJ Stroud, but he went in the top 2 as well, and you see the kind of season that he had. It's not unfortunate, but it is just how the cards were dealt. So those comparisons will always be made. And just continuing on also with Bryce Young as a quarterback, a lot of skepticism is made or has been brought on to Bryce Young for his size. He's only 5'10", and that is something that is worth pointing out, but at the same time, his talent, I think, supersedes that. It just might require a bit more skill set and a lot more protection than it might for a guy that's 6'4", 6'3", type of quarterback that can withstand those hits. But then again, the talent is off the charts, and now they've done a better job of supporting him, bringing in guys like Deontay Johnson, drafting Jonathan Brooks, bringing massive pieces on the offensive line in Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis as well. So they're now starting to get it, but because of what we've seen on tape, Bryce Young will be in there at the number 4 spot. And moving on down the list, we get to number 3 in Derek Carr. Stuck pretty much, as it says on the screen there, at about average, 9-8 season this past year, with Alvin Kamara serving that suspension, is pretty noteworthy. It is pretty, not remarkable, but but missing one of your best pieces on offense, on top of not already having as many options as the Falcons, the Buccaneers, as well in your division. That is pretty. That is something to worth noting, and it is something to acknowledge there for Derek Carr. But at the same time, again, it is a situation where the team is built around Derek Carr, where they don't really help him as much. You only really have Chris Olave there. Rashid Shaheed was also a nice find there to add to that offense, but Michael Thomas rarely showed up. Then he got hurt. So then you really only have Chris Olave and Alvin Kamara when he came back, and it just wasn't enough to compete in that division. Although, in saying that, he nearly threw for 4,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. So, again, it's all right. Those are solid numbers if the rest of the team and just the coaching staff and the rest of the organization was on par. That defense is formidable, but it is getting a little bit older. So if your offense isn't really scoring, it's not really clicking, you get these average records, 9-8, around the wild card spots, and you might miss it more often than not. And it is a shame to see, because since that 2016 season when he just played off the charts and had a good case, I thought, for the MVP until he I want to say he broke his leg, or it was his ankle or something like that. That really derailed everything. He made the playoffs with the Raiders, but he didn't end up playing in that game. And since then, having that 12-3 record in 2016, he hasn't had a better record since 10-7. Sticking around that average mark for Derek Carr. And then you look at him now and projecting later on in his career. He is 33 years old, so it's kind of hard to think then he's going to produce anything more than what you're seeing already on the field. And also athletically, extending plays, that is sort of starting to dwindle down a little bit because of his age. And just like the team around him, as he gets older, is going to need more help to produce at a better level. But the Saints right now, I think, aren't at a position to really do that because of their salary cap situation and things like that. So, he slides in there at number 3 for me. Not the worst, but it could definitely get better for Derek Carr and the Saints. And now it's where it gets a little tricky, and it gets a little tough for me, because I thought this was going to be pretty easy, but it turned up being a little bit harder than I anticipated. At number 2, a surprise, if depending on where you stand as a fan, Kirk Cousins, the number 2 ranked quarterback for me in the NFC South, just because of that injury. And there's a few more reasons, obviously. The injury's the biggest one. 35 years old, coming off of an Achilles injury. He's going to be 36 years old in August, so that's also something that not a lot of people know, or that they will point to. How will he adjust to a new division, a new team, new head coach, new offensive coordinator? All of that takes reps. He is on a good trajectory in his recovery, but at the same time, how will he fit into this Falcons team? I think they're going to be good. They have a great team, but that uncertainty is one point. And also, drafting Michael Penix at number 8 says something to me that a lot of other teams, don't have to face that situation. With Michael Penix, drafting him, you have to have a level of doubt in Kirk Cousins to draft a quarterback at that spot. Past the age, there is that injury, that injury that he's coming off of. So having that doubt, it is in your mind if you're going to draft a quarterback so high as the Falcons did. And also, just going forward, how much more room does he have left to really improve on what you've seen already? And off of that point, talking about how I base these rankings off of, accomplishments, physical traits, extendability, creating those off-script plays. How much more of that can he create at 35 years old? And also, just on the accomplishments, you have a great regular season. He is a great player to get you probably to the playoffs with the level of talent the Falcons have. But on top of that, when you get to the playoffs, he is 1-4 in those playoffs. And it's not like he's had awful teams and he's had to carry them over the line a bunch of times. He's had pretty solid teams. The most noteworthy one is the one against the Giants, where they lost, and they had a pretty solid team at home, but you lose that game and it doesn't leave a good taste in a lot of people's mouths. And a 1-4 record is actually worse than Dak Prescott's, and a lot of people won't stop bashing Dak Prescott and the Cowboys, because obviously they are the Cowboys, but because of Dak, they bash him for his playoff record. And Kirk Cousins has one that's just a little bit worse than him, so that's something else to point to. But they have a better team now than what he did with the Vikings, I should say. But at the same time, having Michael Penix come in makes me think that he's going to play sooner rather than later, and because of that, I have him as my number two ranked quarterback in the NFC South, but he might not even be the starting quarterback for the entirety of this season. So there's a lot of doubt there. It just doesn't leave a good taste in my mouth, so I have him in at number two. And then with the number one spot, obviously, it does fall to Baker Mayfield because of that recency bias. I do acknowledge that a little bit. Coming off of the best year of his career in 2013, posting 64% completion percentage, over 4,000 yards, 28 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. Just won the NFC South division in his first year there. And now he's entering a period, this win now period for the Buccaneers, because he is 29 years old. He just got that contract extension with the Buccaneers, and they were able to bring back a lot of weapons for him to kind of build that chemistry there even more, with Mike Evans being re-signed as well. So that paints a better picture for me. Defensively, I think they're a little bit better than the Falcons, just have a better pass rush, and the secondary is a question mark for me, but I think overall, balance-wise, I also didn't like how the Falcons didn't really address the defense in the first round. I know they addressed it the next four rounds after that, but I'd have to just see it on the field. Right now we're in May, so there's not really too much to base it off of. But on top of that, sticking with Baker, he's very similar to Kirk if you really think about it and look at it. Finding success late in their careers with the Vikings and Kirk Cousins situation, and now Baker Mayfield with the Buccaneers. Getting to the playoffs also is something else. Baker has played in one less game than Kirk Cousins in the playoffs, but he has a little bit of a better winning record. They both have made it only to the divisional round, but Baker has made it there twice, and Kirk has obviously only made it there once, hence the 1-4 record. And also, this is a quarterback ranking for right now and probably going forward. So a 29-year-old Baker Mayfield coming off of the best year of his career just paints a better picture for me than a Kirk Cousins that is right now in a loop, a quarterback battle, if you want to call it that, with Michael Penix and obviously Derek Carr and Bryce Young. Baker, there's no question he's a quarterback there. They're doing everything to make him succeed. They're coming off of winning that division, and I think they have a chance of doing it again. They're going to face more competition, obviously, from the Falcons. But it is going to be a good battle to see there towards really the whole year, because they have the easiest schedules in the NFL. So how they maneuver with injuries and stuff like that should be something to keep an eye out for. But that's my list. Let me know what you guys think about it throughout the duration of this show or in the comments section afterwards, if I got the order right, or if you guys just think I'm crazy for having the order as I do. Leave it all down in the comments below. But in saying that, we will be moving on with the rest of the show. Next up is Trevor Lawrence and his contract negotiations with the Jacksonville Jaguars, plus the Eagles and Cowboys matchup not being on prime time for the first time since 2006. And we're also going to talk about the Steelers schedule and how difficult it is down the stretch there in 2024. So stick around. A lot more to talk about on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.